Hello, this is the Bureau of Lost Culture. I'm Stephen Coates. There's nothing we like better at the Bureau than oral testimonies from people in the counterculture, in the underground. There's some musicians leave behind the counterculture, escape it and attain success in the culture, the overground you could say. Some even take with them a sense of still being countercultural. Tom Waits, maybe Radiohead even. But it's quite rare for a musician to achieve success in the commercial mainstream and then turn and head back into the counterculture. But my guest today has done that at least 3 times. From founding a band in Birmingham in the 70s that went on to huge success, a certain band called Duran Duran, leaving them, later having success as a solo artist himself, and then in the 90s having further solo success as an artist, and then as the songwriter, musical producer for a certain Robbie Williams. You could say he's tasted several times pop success, but each time he seems to turn around and head back into the English folk underground with his band, the Lilac Time. He's Stephen Duffy, and I'm talking to him across the length and breadth of the British Isles. I'm stationed up here in Findhorn, right at the northeast corner of Scotland, and he is in the southwest, in Cornwall. So, Stephen, from across the British Isles, welcome to the Bureau of Lost Culture.
Hello. I'm very pleased to be here talking to you from the opposite end of the country.
Well, welcome. Well, listen, Stephen, I like to start off usually with this easy question just to get us going. You grew up in the 60s and 70s in Birmingham, and, that time, I suppose, is what most people called with the sort of right and smack in the middle of the countercultural era. And what did the counterculture, the underground, mean to you as you were growing up?
We, in Birmingham, we had a shop called the Peace Centre, and it smelt of joss sticks, and there were kind of early fanzines and beatnik books. And so the counterculture meant the Peace Centre to me. Beatnik literature passed through the jasmine and the joss sticks of the late 60s. That was what got me into the whole thing. And later on, the Peace Centre is where you actually went and got your tickets to get on the buses to go on the great CND marches, which is how I got to know London, marching around, banning the bomb. And so that was really successful, as you know.
Yeah, well, the nuclear bomb was set off from Kinloss, which is next to Findhorn here, or they used to anyway.
We banned it all the way up to you.
Yeah, well, if Scotland goes independent, we're going to have to work out what to do with all that nuclear stuff.
Well, you know where they're going to go. They're going to come down here to Cornwall.
Is that right?
Yeah. So,
what do the Cornish feel about that?
I'll have to go and ask them.
Well, let's go back to the 60s and 70s and the Birmingham Peace Centre. Is it still going, the counterculture? Is it still with us?
The amazing thing about having a counterculture, the amazing thing is to have a culture that can actually that incorporates a counterculture. To have a culture that is so huge that you can have a culture and a counterculture is very appealing. And we don't even have a culture anymore, do we? Have you seen it? Have you spotted it? Have you got it in a file behind you? I mean, whereas the culture is gone, the culture is. The culture was put on a drive in 2003, and we haven't backed it up. I'm sorry, and I dropped it. I think
we'll have to send it to one of those very expensive recovery places and try and get it back. We're going to need it. But circling back, so when you were growing up, and all that stuff was going on, ban the bomb and the Peace Centre, and in Birmingham, for you and your friends, was there a sense that there was this thing, the underground, that there was something happening, there was some sort of change in the air, and there was something going on which might be very different than had come before?
Well, definitely. I was born in 1960, so the period of change was happening somewhere else, because Birmingham in the 60s was very, it took a long time. In fact, I don't think the 60s arrived in Birmingham until probably 1970 or so. But there was not only was the Peace Center, but there was the arts lab. There was something going on, and my brother was, and it still is, 4 years older than me. So he would be, he'd be getting the Tyrannosaurus Rex, and he'd be listening to John Peel's Perfumed Garden. So, and he got into the Incredible String Band. And so I was lucky. So the first concert I ever went to was when I was 9 at the Birmingham Town Hall, which was the classic lineup, on just after Weetam and the Big Huge, I suppose. That was my mind blown forever to see them kind of, because that really was the counterculture alive. That was before your very eyes.
Well, we're going to play a song you chose, Ducks on a Pond, from that album. And so that was a signal moment for you, right? And, seeing them and what they were, they're a little bit forgotten. I mean, I don't know much about them, Incredible String Band, but they were kind of very influential at that time on you and on the sort of folk underground. So tell us a little bit about them.
Well, they were a Scottish three-piece from Glasgow. And the first album is kind of quite a straight sort of folky record. And then they all went their separate ways. And Robin went off and got all of these, gimbris and the strange instruments. And Clive left, and they became, well, the epitome of countercultural hippie. But they were just there was a whimsy that has kind of kept people away from them for 50 years. There's something about them that is very divisive. People really can't bear it because Robin's just all over the place because he's so incredibly talented that he can he's swooping around. And then you've got Mike sort of barking and wailing and, playing the harmonica badly, and Christianity, Buddhism, it was all in there.
Ducks on a pond, ducks on a pond, very pretty, swimming round. The lion and the unicorn journey very far. The answers are the questions, sir. The lady soothes the lion's fur. Meek as a lamb he follows her, wherever angels are. Sing me something. I asked the ice, it would not say, but only cracked or moved away. I thought I knew me yesterday, whoever sings this song. Ducks on a pond, ducks on a pond, very pretty, swimming round. Greetings on you, kings in the sky, will buy me a minor bird, play me a magic word, speak of hopes with thoughts absurd, thoughts floating.
It's rather beautiful and wonderful and strange, actually. As we were saying, though, there is a kind of whimsy in it, isn't there? A sort of out-of-time feeling somehow in terms of those nursery rhyme lyrics and stuff. It didn't survive, did it, really?
It didn't survive punk. It didn't survive glam rock. It was so kind of cast aside so quickly. Just amazing. Farewell, sorrow, praise God, the open door. I ain't got no home in this world anymore. So it's kind of bringing in bits of American kind of country folk. But I love this line here. I had a little letter full of paper, inky scratches everywhere. Can't beat that.
You'd mentioned earlier, you had the beatnik era in the 50s, which seems to me anyway to have been quite sophisticated, and jazz and bebop and all that. And then you had the much more visceral, cool, sort of streety rock and roll. This music, which obviously harked back, to an older British tradition with whimsy and pastoral feel. What brought that change about?
Do you think it might have had something to do with LSD?
Ah.
I mean, I might be coming from left field here with this, but it was I think the beatnik thing it became the hippie thing, didn't it? The beats did become hippies. Direct link wasn't from the beatniks, because Allen Ginsberg became the king of the hippies. He grew his hair, he took his clothes off, and then Alan passed it on to Patti Smith, didn't he, in a way? So Patti is the last of the beatniks. And so it did actually last all the way from the 50s up to and including punk. So it was very resilient. But then, unfortunately, the 80s did for everybody. There was this incredible continuity of counterculture and culture and things getting better and better. And then suddenly there was the 80s. And ever since then, it's been the 80s ever since. Don't you think?
Well, it's interesting because, most people, I think, when asked that question about, what is the counterculture, when is the counterculture, we tend to seat it in terms of 1950s, 60s, 70s, and, maybe early 80s. And I wonder whether if we ask the question in sort of 10 years' time, whether the 90s might be included in, because it seemed to me that there were stuff in the 90s, the rave culture, the free festival scene, that was, countercultural.
We did hope that was going to be something. But then the thought of taking mind-bending drugs in a nightclub, listening to terrible music, wasn't what I was all about by that stage. I wonder if Allen Ginsberg probably would have been there, but I was just not Ginsberg enough. Mm. And I was also very worried in fact, I wrote songs about this, that when this all happened and people were, you had the Travelers and the rave scene, and it was just like, you realized how easy you had it if you were kind of a late hippie and then a punk. That was very easy. You didn't have to go and sleep in a hedgerow and endure the sort of the piercings and the tattoos, the terrible rave music, and not knowing what you were ingesting.
But did perhaps something happen in the 80s that was a kind of sea change? I've been talking with the writer Michael Moorcock, and he very much sees it in terms of that the 80s sort of did for it in some fundamental way. He put that down to the kind of Thatcher era particularly he was talking about London, I suppose, but the kind of commercialisation of London, the capitalisation of London in terms of property and just general values, that kind of, definitely ended something. Do you think so?
I think that, what we have to remember under James Callaghan, the difference between the disparity between rich and poor was at its smallest of all time. It's never been as, the rich. And so that, I think it felt, and that's why they went absolutely apeshit and thought we're going to have to bring the army in here to get rid of these socialists, because things are just becoming a little bit too equal. We could afford, even though we'd spent our lives building cars, we could now actually afford to buy them. And this appalled them so much that they had to kind of have this coup and put Thatcher in. And then they moaned about the counterculture, and they still are, aren't they? They hate. There's something about it they really hate, and the way that the 70s has been so incredibly disparaged. And the 70s was a fantastic time because for the first time, working class people actually could afford to get on a plane and had holidays, and could afford to do things.
Interesting. I suppose the beautiful summer of love, psychedelic experiences, possibly acid fueled, many of them of the 60s. As the 60s turned to 70s, and a lot of that countercultural stuff gets more political, more activist. That's where the ecological movement got going, and gay rights and women's rights and all that sort of stuff. But didn't it founder a little bit just because the economic situation was quite tough in the 70s?
I don't think it was. I think it was the first time that ordinary people actually had money, because the unions they always kind of say, oh, the unions destroyed, but the unions gave us money for the first time. So there was, so that was the first time that you could actually afford to buy, books and records and stuff. And of course, then when Thatcher got in, the culmination of the counterculture was probably the riots, wasn't it? Maybe it was the miners' strike. Maybe it was that was the end of it in some way, when you just thought they've won. But then out of that came the rave scene, as you.
But then, of course, the rave scene was was when the government actually tried to legislate, didn't they, with the kind of laws against repetitive beats and people gathering in fields and all that sort of stuff, pretty unsuccessfully, as far as I can tell. But let's go back to you. So you've had this kind of, big influential experience by seeing the incredible string band in Birmingham, but then things are changing quite a lot musically. Glam, as you mentioned, and then punk. So did they come in and did they start to influence you?
I think I saw the Incredible String Band twice, and then I saw the Ziggy Stardust tour, also at the Birmingham Town Hall. So that was kind of extraordinary. But there was something about that I knew I could never, that was just so extraordinary that you couldn't possibly I couldn't picture myself being involved in that. So I kept on with the folky thing myself, and until punk came along. And of course, if you listen to the first Clash album, that is kind of a folk album.
That's interesting, because
it's so sort of weedy. It is basically. I mean, you could have done it on a couple of acoustic guitars and distorted it a bit, but it is basically a folk album, isn't it?
I'm going to have to have a listen to that.
I suppose I think maybe it was the synthesizer that killed. I think it was Gary Numan. Definitely, without question, Gary killed the counterculture. He crashed his Tory plane right into my Peace Centre. It was all over.
We'll have to ask him, see if he agrees with that. He is one of the very, very few musicians who admits to being a Tory, isn't he? There's him and I think the drummer from ELO.
And obviously the Take That maestro.
Gary Barlow.
He's also a Tory. But to bring us on to something else, there's an amazing film by the Watersons called Travelling for a Living. And it's a documentary. It might have even been a BBC documentary. And I think you can still see it on the BFI channel. And it's about them, because the Watersons were completely a cappella. I think that they might have used guitar a little bit. The best film about music that there is. You kind of have this idea of people traveling around. I think that they tried to drive back to Hull every night from wherever they were playing in Great Britain. And if they couldn't manage it, there's a great scene where they're kind of carrying mattresses out of their van. And, just the idea of what this life was like, singing sort of folk songs and sea shanties and stuff.
Right, so the Watersons were an English folk group. They're from Yorkshire, from Hull, as you said, and a family, weren't they, really? A family with sort of shifting members, singing traditional songs with accompaniment and with harmonies, and from the 60s and 70s and 80s. So how did you come across them?
Because I was kind of into the folk thing, and I'd go to folk festivals. There was one outside the Birmingham Repertory Theatre in the mid-70s, and inside that, on the evening, it was I think they were all West Midland. The all West Midland version of Fairport Convention played, and were louder than Slade. It was quite incredible. But before that, outside, Martin Carthy had played acoustically, and obviously he was probably already married to Norma Waterson. So that's how I kind of discovered them, and it was just so shocking. In fact, down here we have a sea shanty festival, and I keep on thinking, well, one of these days I will write a batch of sea shanties and then go to the shanty festival and sing them and see if I can get away with it.
There's something about the folk underground that, obviously you could trace it back to, medieval times or earlier, I don't know. But I mean, in terms of that 20th century, that re-emerge in the 60s and 70s obviously influenced you. The Waterstones very much part of that, and it's just kept going, hasn't it? And you've kept returning to it. I mentioned in the intro, you know, you've had this rather remarkable career where you've been in the charts, commercial success several times, but you keep returning to this roots. It's almost like there's some sort of countercultural soul gravity pulling you back repeatedly from other things which you've experimented with so very successfully, and it pulls you back into this sort of current of the folk underground. Why is that?
I just, and this has been my thing for the whole time, is I just feel like I have to carry on until somebody takes me as seriously as I take myself. And I think that's probably the case for most artists. You have this kind of, well, I do. I have this incredible sense of self-belief. And, you know, I'm just desperate for somebody else to believe in me as much as I believe in myself. And, it hasn't happened yet. But I keep on thinking, well, I'll make another record. Maybe they'll get it this time. You know what I mean? And it never happens. And I'm always, incredibly disappointed. But there's going to be another one next year, Lilac 11.
Lilac 11. Well, you have been going since 1986. We're going to hear something from that a bit later. But let's hear something from the Watersons. This is All for Me Grog and Tobacco.
All for me grog, for me jolly, jolly grog. All for me grog and tobacco. For I spent all me store with the lasses on the shore. And it's all for me grog and tobacco. All for me grog, for me jolly, jolly grog. All for me grog and tobacco. For I spent all my store with the lasses on the shore. And it's all for me grog and tobacco. When I come home, then me sweetheart I shall see. All for me grog and tobacco. And me sweetheart will sing when she sees the wedding ring. And it's all for me grog and tobacco. All for me grog, for me jolly, jolly grog. All for me grog and tobacco. For I spent all my store with the lasses on the shore. And it's all for me grog and tobacco. When she's a sun for to dangle on her name. All for me grog and tobacco. And she'll sing him to sleep while I sail the stormy deep. And it's all for me grog and tobacco. All for me grog, for me jolly, jolly grog. All for me grog and tobacco. For I spent all my store with the lasses on the shore. And it's all for me grog and tobacco.
Tell us why you love that.
I think that actually is from the film Traveling for a Living. And which, if anybody right now, stop listening to this and go and find this film and watch it, because it will change your life. It might put you off music forever, but there is something, especially the scene where they're singing this in the club, there's something about it that I find incredibly moving. The idea of them driving around the country and singing these songs, and a lot of the songs are about the sea and about Hull. I don't know. To me, there are the Beatles, and then there's the Watersons, an incredible string band, and the Birmingham lineup of Fairport Convention, who were as loud as Slade, and actually maybe even Slade as well.
And that's a song about smoking and drinking. Of course, not a fashionable subject for lyrics these days.
But that's why everybody got into music in the first place, isn't it? So, we just wanted to, instead of going to work, you just wanted to smoke and drink. And that's on Sunday nights, my family, who they worked for the telephone, the GPO, and they were they were registrars, and they had jobs they hated anyway. And my dad was a telephone engineer, and the way that they, the Sunday night and the weekend was over, and they were going to have to go back and have no time to do their own thing. And this absolutely, and I suppose that's why we became so countercultural, was because we didn't want to be part of that. And then in the 80s, when there was such terrible unemployment, I would never go on a right to work, because work was exactly, the thing you just didn't want to do, because you saw how it destroyed your family. And obviously you just wanted to, you wanted to do your own thing. And what could be more countercultural than doing your own thing?
Well, exactly. And they're a family, broadly, the Waterstones, and, you're talking about your family there, and there is something in that folk tradition of the family or the collective, something communal, the sing-along. And with the Lilac Time, I mean, was that part of the appeal for you, not to be a solo artist, not to step away from the kind of limelight and to be part of a group, collective thing rather than a solo or a stardom thing in some way?
Well, actually, this brings us on to the I've also been putting together this album of cassettes recorded in 1979, 80 and 81, when I was in a band with the sadly just departed David Cusworth, who was in a band with Nicky Sudden after the Swell Maps. And I did a gig last year, and he in Birmingham, and he came, and he said, the last thing he said to me was, we really must put out a record of this thing. And then he died. Which is, extraordinary that the last thing he ever said to me was this thing. So I'm now compiling this record from the cassettes. But when you listen to what we were doing back then, it really, what I say is, it's not demos. We weren't making demos that could then be turned into singles so we could be successful. They're more like field recordings for an idea, for not even a lifestyle, just for a life, where you'd sort of make a record and do enough gigs to call it a tour and maybe a Peel session. I mean, that was it. There was never, the idea of stardom was sort of not part of the counterculture, really, was it?
I don't think so. I mean, it seems to be sort of a bit anti-stardom and maybe anti-individualistic. Obviously, stars definitely came out of it. But there's something also that you referred to then and a bit earlier, is that I don't know the politics of the Waterstones or of, your politics. But there is something, it seems to me, of the folk counterculture that's resolutely of the left. It's difficult to imagine a kind of right-wing folk tradition somehow. I don't know if there is one. Am I missing something?
Well, what music does promote the culture of the right? Wagner? It's very difficult to think of. I mean, because that's their huge bugbear, isn't it? The fact that there is actually no good right-wing culture, and all of the good stuff comes from the left. I mean, look at Corbyn. You can just tell he's got a fantastic Waterstones record collection at home. It's got all the.
Well, it's difficult to imagine Boris listening to the Waterstones. I might have got him wrong, and I can't imagine maybe he's caught the vinyl bug. Who knows? You know
what Boris's favourite record is?
I don't.
Goat's Head Soup.
Goat's Head Soup. He's a Stones fan.
Every time he gets a new office, he kind of gets his sound system and he puts on his CD, probably, of Goat's Head Soup.
Well, Mick Jagger went to London Business School, didn't he? Maybe that's what it is. Let's move on to another one of your choices, and this is by Anne Briggs. Again, I don't know anything about Anne Briggs. Tell us, who is she?
Well, I mentioned her before. She was actually part of this Waterstones incredible string band, Bert Jansch, Clive's original folk club. So she's a part of all of that. And I think Bert used to do Blackwater Side too, and Led Zeppelin probably stole it. But she is the solo superstar of this early folk culture.
One morning fair to take the air down by Blackwater side. 'twas in gazing all around me. 'Twas the Irish lad I spied. All through the far part of the night, while we lay in sport and play, then this young man he arose, and he gathered his clothes. He said, fare thee well today. Well, that's not the promise that you gave to me when first you lay on my bed. You could make me believe with your lying tongue that the sun rose in the west. Then go home, go home.
That is very beautiful. So, what happened with her, with Anne Briggs?
But she actually left. She's kind of dropped out altogether and went and lived on a beach in the Highlands. So, I mean, she really did live it. You know, she got out there and, you know, can you imagine actually being that good and thinking, no, I'm just going to live on a beach in Scotland? We would kill to be able, to be able to do that, like that in one take, to be that good.
Right. And, it is otherworldly and magical, and also to me sort of somewhat out of time. So what is it for you that is so inspiring or so moving in that, or in her music?
It doesn't sound old fashioned, does it? It doesn't. It's a traditional folk song, but it doesn't. To me, it doesn't sound like it was recorded in the 60s or the 70s. It just is. It's very difficult to say why music moves you. I did an interview with somebody about Nick Drake years ago, and I got there and I couldn't think of anything to say, apart from yes. There's very little. You know what I mean. When you're in love with something, it kind of goes beyond words, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, when I said out of time, I mean, don't know anything about her or when that was recorded, but it could have been recorded this week. I mean, sound-wise. And I remember when Watchmen came out, and I was sitting in the cinema, and it starts off with that amazing sequence, which is soundtracked by The Times They Are Changing by Dylan. And I'd never heard that track in that sort of setting before. But it sounded so amazing, and it had that same quality in a way. Was it recorded in the early 60s or mid-60s, or was it recorded last week?
Something about that sort of dead acoustic guitar, or the sound, you just think, well, they obviously haven't changed the strings since 1843. There's that sort of incredibly dry, dead sound, and then that sort of, is such a fantastic setting for a voice like Dylan's or Anne Briggs. So and I always think I'm going to make a record like that, and then I start, and then I think I'm going to have to play the bass, and then I'm going to play the drums. I'm going to play the drums, and now I'm going to play the organ, and Nick's going to come and play the banjo. We're going to put backing vocals on it. Fuck it. You know what I mean? And it's just like, I always think it's going to be simple. It's going to be one chord and this beautiful thing. And then, I was born to overdub. I just love it.
Look, I'm a fan of the overdub. It's probably because I can't play anything very well. I love overdubbing and garnishing things. But let's go back to the beginning of the Lilac Time. So 1986. So as we said earlier, you'd had and were having, commercial chart success. and you said that Nick, your older brother, had taken you to see the Incredible String Band, and obviously been a signal experience, and that was obviously circulating with you still. But you decide around about then, middle of the 80s, to, not turn your back on sort of success or anything, but I mean to take a different direction, to go back maybe to those earlier inspirations with Nick and to form the Lilac Time. And you've been doing that ever since, obviously with forays into other things. But you've stuck at it through thick and thin in a kind of countercultural way, where as fashions have come and gone, and there's been very few other bands at times doing that sort of thing, and much more now. But what was it? Why?
Well, the strange thing was that on my 25th birthday, I was on Top of the Pops doing icing on the cake. And then my next birthday, so I was 25. On my 26th birthday, they played, was the first time they put Don't Look Back, the Dylan film, on the television, And I watched that. And there was something about the acoustic guitar. So that was the kind of the turning point that I thought I've got to go back to the acoustic music. That I can't. The pop thing had turned its back on me because I was such an uncomfortable pop star. Because I didn't believe it. I didn't believe in it. It was what was happening, and I felt like I wanted to be part of that conversation or be part of the whole thing, but it just didn't suit me. So I decided. So I went back to Birmingham to Bob Lamb, who made the first UB40 album on a 4-track in his flat, and he, a genius of recording, capturing stuff on tape, on electronic tape. So I went there and made 6 tracks. And took them back to Virgin Records, and they dropped me straight away. Return to Yesterday, but basically the first side of the Lilac Time album, because that they were becoming more of a dance label anyway. So it was, are we going to release Return to Yesterday with Stephen Duffy, or are we going to put the Mantronics record out? And they chose Mantronics, and who can blame them? I would have done the same.
What happened to Mantronics?
I don't know. That's a very interesting question. I still have the record back there.
So what happened next? I mean, you've been dropped by Virgin. I mean, I've been dropped by a fair few labels and publishers. Quite a long list. But I read somewhere that you said I think you were quite proud that you've been dropped by some of the best labels in the world.
I've been dropped by more labels than there actually are now, because there's only 3. So I went to a little record shop in Birmingham called Swordfish, who had their own label, and I said, can you release this before Christmas? And they could. I think was like 1987. Yes. So that's the next year, 1987. And they said, yeah. So I gave them the tapes, and we put out the first Lilac Time album. And then the inevitable, then what has always happened, we got great reviews. And we went off to play that strange bar in Manchester University and Princess Charlotte and, all of those venues that probably have only just stopped existing. And that's the tour that I've always done. I've never really got beyond that, the first tour. So the Lilac Time endlessly did the first tour.
And you decamped as a group to Malvern, right? Great Malvern, right?
Yeah, because we had to go and get it together in the country. I knew what we had to do. And so I found this incredibly old farmhouse, and it didn't have a phone. But I mean, in my telling of the story, I kind of say that we all lived in this, but I didn't. I actually bought a house up the hill, and I kind of looked down on the serfs of the rest of the Lilac Time. My brother kind of talks about that time and saying, crumbs in the butter. And that's all you have to know about what the Lilac Time were up to. And my brother's whole life, crumbs in the butter, the Lilac Time by Nick Duffy.
Roll.
But funny thing is, we were on, the record had come out, and suddenly people wanted to sign us, after the indie record. And Virgin tried to sign us. I didn't kind of say, well, you actually own half of this record. You paid for it with the demos. And but we signed with Fontana, and who were in the States were Mercury, and they kind of were quite enthusiastic about us. And we went and played in America. We played in Woodstock and all over America. But to actually go and talk to Mercury or talk to Fontana, we had to walk through fields to a phone box outside the pub, 3/4 of a mile away, because there was no phones in the 14th century farmhouse that I put everybody in with crumbs in the butter. I don't know whether that's why we didn't make it or why we're still together.
And you are still together, and you have kept going. As I keep saying, you've had forays off into do other things and back into the charts. But you keep returning and you keep going all this time, all these albums, all these songs. I just want to hear a bit more about why, I suppose, and what it is that's this sort of countercultural gravity, as I think of it, that keeps drawing you back, or maybe you see it a different way.
When I lived in Great Malvern, Martin Carthy and Dave Swarbrick came to play a little pub down the road, and this was like 1990, and it's things like that you're out and about, and Nigel Kennedy had moved in a few doors up the road. It was kind of a crazy time for Worcestershire in general. But we went down to this gig, and just to see them, it's that remembering, being with these people, being reminded that the Martin Carthy, one of the greatest guitarists of all time, Dave Swarbrick, a fantastic violinist and singer. I mean, some of his singing in Fairport is brilliant. And there they were. They didn't even have a PA. I think they were just doing it, and it's that. That's what keeps, if they did it. And it's kind of like Patti Smith, isn't it? She said she calls it her work. It's like she's driven to, and I think that you've either got that or, but, I left Duran Duran because they wanted to sound like Japan. It would probably have been easier to have stayed and sounded like Japan. You know what I mean? But I felt like I had to go and write a sea shanty even at that point. Take off these satin jodhpurs. Wipe the mascara away. Where is my grog? Nick Rhodes, where is my grog and tobacco?
Let's have a listen then to some Dave Swarbrick. This is your choice. This is the Ace and Juice of Pipering. There's something amazingly joyful about that, isn't it? It's and positive and also sort of strangely groovy. It sort of swings and it's almost like sort of dance music played on a monophonic instrument. What is it?
Got that sort of when Glenn Gould does the Goldberg variations, and it becomes like jazz, and that swings. It's just like that ability to swing in a place where you kind of feel that it's actually inappropriate. To actually be able to make a solo violin jig be sort of swing and sexy is kind of incredible. And at that gig that I went to in Malvern, Nigel came too, and he kind of got up and they were playing. So Swarbrick and Nigel Kennedy were playing together, and Swarbrick was so confident in his thing that he was trying to boss Nigel Kennedy, that he was trying to take, and that Nigel was at his absolute imperial pomp. It was after the Four Seasons, but Swarb still thought he could take him on. Which was just an amazing, to witness. They were trying to kind of push each other kind of away from they were trying to, I'm going to boss this one. I'm going to swing. No, I'm going to swing. It was an amazing thing. Great gigs, great times.
And at your gigs, how were the audiences? How did the audiences respond to the Lilac Time? Because, you were countercultural, you're out of fashion. Particularly, I think in 80s and 90s, it's kind of different now, isn't it? But who were the audience?
Well, that's the thing. There wasn't really much of an audience. So, I mean, the ones who were there responded brilliantly, because I think they felt embarrassed for us. I mean, I actually did do a gig in Newcastle once when nobody turned up.
The gig of death, yeah.
But I think that it did coincide with them winning something, and there was like a parade down the street. Or maybe they made that up. Newcastle United, when was the last time they won anything?
Well, we went to Moscow. We were taken to Moscow once, a vast expense to play at a private party, and there was nobody came to see us at all.
Even the person who was throwing the party didn't turn up.
The person who's throwing the party didn't turn up. I'm not even sure whether the person who's throwing the party was at the party. But there was the party was going on in one big room, and we were in the next room, and there was nobody there. So I did say to the fixer and the person who brought us, shall we carry on? There's nobody here. And he's like, oh, no, you've been contracted. You have to carry on. So we played to nobody.
That's what you do. That's
counterculture. But didn't you also, at Lilac Time, didn't you do a tour of village greens of England?
We did. This was another one of Alan McGee's ideas for us, because it was all part of that rave time. It's like, let's do a free tour. Let's do it. So we put a number in the paper, and people could phone up and say, we'd like you to come and play here. And we all got in a van with a PA, and we drove off. But our trust, or Alan's trust in people who can actually use a phone and kind of say, come and play here, that they weren't necessarily the best promoters of. That was another tour where we played to a lot of empty places and 3 or 4 very chuffed people who had managed to book us. So we did. That was kind of like, but playing that was like playing private parties to nobody. But apparently, a couple of the guys from Radiohead tried to get us to come and play, but we didn't do that one. Unfortunately, that would have been useful. That would have been networking for the Lilac Time.
Yes, but you have had the experience of playing in very different settings, haven't you? When you were working with Robbie Williams, I mean, you were playing to vast, enormodromes in Southeast Asia, to tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people on vast stages with, huge production teams and stuff. But as ever, you left that behind and came back to the Lilac Time. Are you missing the village greens?
We did a world tour after I did the record with Rob. But the strange thing is, the Lilac Time got back together just before I was working on that record with Robert, and we just played Cecil Sharp House, which of course is the epicenter of the folk movement. And then the next gig after that I did was with Rob at Live 8. It was Pink Floyd's last gig, which brings us back round full circle to the Joe Boyd and the counterculture. And then we went all over the world playing Olympic stadiums and stuff. And then we got back to Hampden or somewhere in Scotland, and it was like playing a club, playing Hampden Stadium, because the Olympic stadiums were so much bigger. But it really made me realize that it was, it was good that I had left Duran Duran, because I would have been rotten at that.
Why?
You have to be big, don't you? You have to be like Springsteen, or there's something about, you have to have a commanding, charismatic presence, don't you, to play a stadium? And, my little songs and little voice, I don't think it would have. But so I was glad that, I gave Simon Le Bon a break there and kind of said, here, you take this one. And because it would have been dreadful. And so I got back, but I'd had this unfortunate experience. So I kind of just thought everything I did was really important. And so I kind of we booked a few dates, and I had like a Pro Tools rig, and of course, nobody really turned up to these either. And I made this expensive record, but it wasn't really that expensive. And I suddenly realized that things had moved on. Whilst I'd been away playing in stadiums, that, people had learned how to download music, and I was on this sort of vanity tour.
Well, you came back, you made several more records since. Astronauts is that record from all those years ago is going to be reissued, and you've got a single out at the moment and a new album coming. Stephen, we're getting to the end. I actually wanted to play a song from Astronauts just because I really like it, and it's I love that record. And we were talking earlier about that studio where you made it, and I did some stuff back in the day, and also living in North Kensington. I lived in a tower block opposite Grenfell, obviously many years before that hideous incident when it burnt down tragically. But I think also because North Kensington, next to Ladbroke Grove, next to Portobello, near Portobello. And, several people that we've had on this show had some connection there, including Nick Laird-Clues, your friend. And, that was such an important part of the counterculture in London. So, and you lived there for quite a while, right?
I lived in Queen's Park, which apparently constitutes being part of North Kensington. But this song, North Kensington, is about when we left London and went off to put crumbs in the butter in Great Malvern, mixing it up as only the Lilac Time could.
North Kensington, blue skies are over you. Oh, smiling eyes, how sun baptized in perspiration like a field of dew. The sticky fence you pushed me through. North Kensington, where we first played, we first made love. North Kensington, where I took your hand and fell about the life we planned. By Worcester racecourse and to Singing Sand, the blood red wine and you divine. North Kensington, where we first laid, we first made love. 4 in the morning, wrapped in an awning, I came to the seaside to see why the girl cried, and oh, why.
love that. How does it feel to you listening to that 30 years? And I'm sure you've listened to it in the intervening years.
I haven't really heard it that much since. And before we started this interview, we talked about corner recorders and that the car horn and all of that. It was recorded one Saturday with the microphone out the window at corner recorders, and then the recorders, the fluty bit was actually recorded in that little small cupboard room in Great Malvern, in West Malvern, actually looking over Worcestershire from the hills. And I was kind of sitting there in this tiny little room with my Shure 57. So that's what. But I was relieved that the drums never came in. I kept on waiting for the drums to come in, and it was like, thank God for that.
So, Stephen, I think we've got to the end. Thank you very much for that wonderful wander through your countercultural life and the life of Lilac Time. So, Lilac 11's coming, Astronauts reissued, and you've got another project on the way, right?
This strange cassette record of me and David Cusworth in a band called The Hawks. Obviously 5 Believers, that's coming on 17 Records in the spring.
Sounds like a busy 2021 there. Well, listen, why don't we finish up with a song from this latest release, this latest EP of yours, which has got 2 cover versions, and one of which is a Bert Jansch song. So tell us about that.
It's a disco 45 12-inch. It's called The Hills of Cinnamon. And on the back, we have There Comes a Time by Bert Jansch and Pancho and Lefty by Townes Van Zandt. It's well worth £14 or however much disco 45 12-inch vinyl singles cost these days.
We'll put a link to that in the show notes. Thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you very much for having me.
So this is the Lilac Time. Comes a Time.
There comes a time, babe, when we gotta go. Our time here has been great up till now, but gotta go, love. Hit the road and start another show. One too many mornings we've been lazing. One too many nights fooling round, babe, not caring, not knowing how we're faring. We're living side by side, love, not knowing where we are bound or where on earth, love, we are going. Seed of life still growing. Come spring next year, love, we could be laughing, could be riding high and free with the sun upon our backs. We could be singing with the birds a-winging. Let us pack our things and leave tonight, gal. Keep going till the road runs out and comes to an end, girl. And hope that life turns out
Bert Jansch's song There Comes a Time, covered by the Lilac Time on their recent vinyl release, and my guest was the Lilac Time Stephen Duffy. Wonderful wander through his life and times in the folk underground and the counterculture. I'm Stephen Coates. This was the Bureau of Lost Culture. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. I ought to say, actually, you can now check out all our programmes at bureauoflostculture.com, but you can also check them out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, anywhere where you can get podcasts. You can subscribe, just put in bureauoflostculture.com. You can even leave a review if you like. We'd like that very much. Anyway, see you, hear you next time.